Perfection's kind of an odd notion in any given arena. It's particularly problematic when it comes to things like created works. I mean, for when people use the term perfect, they tend to... It's one of those abused terms like natural, for example. People profoundly fail to quantify what they mean when they refer to the term perfect. I used to come up against it a lot when I used to argue with people who believe in some notion of a perfect creator entity, regardless of what area they come from. For me, one of the key reasons I don't believe and cannot believe in a perfect creator entity is because of the nature of reality itself. The existence of reality, to me, stands as evidence against there being any notion of a perfect creator. The very notion, for me, the notion of a perfect creator is oxymoronic. It contains within itself, it's almost a tautology, it contains within itself its own paradox. When you consider that the imperative to create is a product of imperfection. For a given definition of perfection, for me, if you're going to use the term perfect, then you need to understand it's an absolute term. There's no arguing or whiff-waffing as to what it might mean. It has to be absolute. By its very nature, the concept of perfection has to incorporate an absolutism. And for me, the only thing synonymous with perfection is absolute nothing. That stasis, that which cannot change, that which has no imperative, that which cannot change state, that's perfect. The abyss is perfect. Absolute nothingness, the void, even the void between stars changes, so there's no perfection there. But absolute unchangeable nothing is the only thing that can be legitimately described as perfect. The only thing. Because it is by its very nature unchangeable. That which has a creative imperative, by its very nature, desires to change its state. Therefore cannot be perfect. It's impossible. Not just the act of creation, but the imperative to create, the process by which the imperative to create occurs. The circumstances acting upon the entity or object that requires creation, or that obliges the creative imperative or cultivates it, by their very nature, if they exist, they make the thing they're acting upon not perfect. So there cannot be a perfect creative entity. By the very nature of reality, by the fact that reality exists, there just cannot be. Now, if you want to talk about it in Lovecraftian terms, if you want to talk in terms of imperfect creator entities or intelligences that maybe interfere with the nature of reality in some way, fine, we can have that argument. I don't see any evidence for that, but fine, we can have that argument. But when it comes to things that we create, to our own media, then there's no such thing. I mean, there's just no such thing. It's impossible. The notion of perfection is an almost meaningless term. What you can look at are things like, for example, there are created things that might be the most significant to you as an individual. There's the subjective way of looking at things. For me, Clive Barker's novel Weaveworld, not perfect by any margin, but it is one of the most significant pieces of work I've ever read. The poetry of William Blake, to me, some of the most beautiful out there. The poetry of John Donne, so significant. Would I call it perfect? No, but nothing is. There is no such thing. But what you can look at, you can separate your own subjective experience to things and look at them on a technical level. It's something that people of my generation seem to have problems with, quite a lot actually, and that may be because of the powerful way in which we identify with the media we experienced as children. There is this tendency in my generation, it seems, that we're early millennials, sort of people born in the mid-1980s, early 1990s, to identify very strongly with the media that they experienced as children. And some do it in a very healthy way, some do it in a very unhealthy way. The ones who do it healthily are the ones who acknowledge that, yes, this was significant to us because it did something to our imaginations, but it's by no means the best incarnation of these particular franchises or subjects. In fact, in many respects, it was pretty damn bad. I mean, the obvious one for me would obviously be the Transformers series. So, back in the 1980s, the Transformers show, the cartoon, it was very meaningful to me as a child. I loved it as a child. It was really important to me. But looking back at it now, it's terrible. I mean, on an objective technical level, it's absolutely terrible. The animation is awful. The stories are stock. It only exists to sell you toys. I mean, that is largely it. There are rare examples of episodes where writers came on who wanted to tell a story, a sincere story. Mostly they're the David Wise episodes. But beyond that, they were terrible. And that's true for the vast majority of children's media when I was a kid. There are exceptions. Most of them produced here in the UK, it has to be said, or in Europe. Things like Nightmare, which we've spoken about before. Things that genuinely wanted to tell children's stories and do... I mean, one I came across recently, which I thought was really fascinating, was the Real Ghostbusters cartoon. Now, that did have a franchise attached to it, a really big one, actually. That had a toy line attached to it that was huge and lasted for years, and was a phenomenon in the mid to late 1980s, early 90s. Everybody loved Ghostbusters. When I was a kid, everybody loved Ghostbusters. But the cartoon is this strange entity that includes hardly any of the toys at all. There are hardly any little toy commercials in it. There are some examples, but they're very rare and few and far between. And for the most part, the episodes of Real Ghostbusters are really good. It's a kind of... I suppose it's a kind of Tales of the Unexpected for kids. It's a little mini comic horror show for kids. And some of the stories, they're really funny, really satirical, and contain some quite adult references to media. There are episodes that satirise Star Trek. There are episodes that satirise Lovecraft, Mr. Rogers, bizarrely. There are some really good, fun episodes out there. One I can think of off the top of my head that I adored as a kid was an episode called Knock Knock. And Knock Knock is just flat out brilliant. It is flat out brilliant. It is really good children's storytelling. It involves a door, this arcane Lovecraftian door that's found in the underground of New York City by a group of subway diggers. And there's a face on it, like a carved face that speaks, and it says in its very sort of demonic resonant voice, "Do not open until doomsday." And the drillers, unfortunately, don't listen to it and open it. And it's the door to the end of the world. It's the door to apocalypse, and all of the metaphysical weirdness that the Ghostbusters have been fighting against spills out and starts to transform the world into what it's supposed to be after the end of days. And the Ghostbusters have to go down into the subway and close it again. But down in the subway, it has transformed everything. So they experience these really bizarre, strange, kind of disturbing situations. It is one of the most horror-based episodes of the Real Ghostbusters. Most of them are kind of funny. You know, there's a satirical edge to them. But it's very good. It's a really excellent piece of work. But for the most part, I mean, children's franchises when I was a kid were not very good. They just weren't very good. And the more recent incarnations of them are fantastic. A really good example would be the Thundercats. Now, most people have really fond memories of the Thundercats from when they were kids. I do. I enjoy Thundercats fine. It's shit. On an objective technical level, the opening sequence is great. Some of the environments are really good. Some of the implied mythology behind Mum-Ra and Third Earth is really fun, but the show never explores it. It's a terrible show. Terrible stories, all stock 1980s fare. You all know them. You all know the stories. They could have been produced by computer, basically. The voice acting and direction is pretty bad. The animation is choppy and all over the place. It's pretty silly. It's a toy commercial. In 2011, there was a new series that was optioned by the same animation studio that did Avatar, The Last Airbender, and it was really good. It was really good. Unfortunately, nobody paid attention to it, so it didn't go anywhere. It died after one season. Even though it did pretty much everything everybody wanted with the Thundercats material. It gave it back mythology, it gave it character. It was the same animation studio and writing team that did Avatar. I mean, come on, it's going to be brilliant, isn't it? In fact, Avatar's a really good example. That sort of early to mid 2000s era was a kind of golden era for revolutionary children's animation. Some of the stuff produced then, stuff like Samurai Jack, the Gennady Tartakovsky stuff like Dexter's Lab and Powerpuff Girls, the big one, Avatar The Last Airbender. Easily, Avatar The Last Airbender, probably one of the best shows around. Probably one of the best written shows in all of history. Whether it's aimed at adults, whether it's aimed at children, it's beautiful. I defy anyone to watch the episode Tales of Ba Sing Se and not be utterly undone by it, profoundly moved, particularly Iroh's story. It is beautiful. It's beautiful work. And kind of an example of what I'm talking about. A lot of people would describe that as almost perfect. It's almost perfect. But like any created thing, perfection is problematic as a concept. It's a beautiful show. It's a really beautiful show that resonates with and talks to a lot of people because it's so well done and has such universal connotations within it, and it's just so well handled. The writing is exquisite, the world is beautifully rendered, the metaphysics of that show is sublime, the characters are great, obviously, but it's an example of how children's media has evolved, and in fact that is one of the embers that sparked the inferno. It's one of the sparks of revolution that changed the landscape of children's media, because here you had a children's show that had no toy line attached to it, no franchise at all, its own homegrown thing, but which did not want to essentially just sell shit to children. It wanted to move them, it wanted to unveil them, it wanted to change their states of mind and inspire them, and it has. A lot of the stuff that's being produced now is it's kind of the child of Avatar The Last Airbender. Stuff that came later, like Adventure Time, for example, like Steven Universe, all of that stuff owes a debt to Avatar The Last Airbender. The Netflix She-Ra is a fantastic example. More recently, we've had stuff like Centaur World. Seen Centaur World yet? Centaur World is it's a difficult one, because I think a lot of people will see the first episode then turn it off. They won't get what it's going for, because it is an odd show. It's ostensibly aimed at children, but it's actually so much more sophisticated than most children would probably be able to appreciate. It is a show that is created to explore its own deviance. It's designed to disappoint and invert expectation. It's really bloody clever. The opening sequence, watching it, you would think, well, this is going to be a kind of dark fantasy, a little bit like The Dragon Prince, a little bit like Avatar The Last Airbender, with maybe some comedy elements. It's incredibly dark. It opens on this war-torn, ravaged world with fires, and there's war going on, and there are these very kind of scary Lord of the Rings style orcish monsters wandering around. And then the whole thing changes. The whole thing inverts itself to the point whereby even the animation style changes. It becomes like Adventure Time, like a Looney Tune. It transverts into this strange cartoon world where there are honest-to-God musical numbers, like a Disney cartoon, where everything is elastic and fun and sarcastic and pop culture referencing. Everything is so colourful and fast. I imagine a lot of people are going to get whiplash from it. But even when it does that, there are these undercurrents and subtexts of something darker, something mythological happening that build and build and build throughout the show. There are moments of emotional resonance that are very profound. The characters have all got things going on. They've all got trauma in their backgrounds. They've all got some hidden depth. And then, towards the end, you get the manifestation of that darkness, and it is so grim, it's so dark, it's so Lovecraftian and horrific, it kind of slaps you round the face. It's kind of brilliant. It's treating its audience with incredible sophistication. It is assuming that they will have the intelligence to understand what it's doing rather than be alienated by it. Now, that said, is it in any way perfect? No, no. People will be turned off by this. They'll be turned off by one of the different segments depending on what they want. So some people will be turned off by the beginning, some people will be turned off by the transition to something tonally completely different. It is when it transmits to the cartoon world, to Centaur world itself, it's very quick, it's very vibrant, it never stops. The cartoon stuff comes thick and fast, and it's just joke after joke after joke after joke. Some of it slapstick, some of it verbal, some of it just its own zany weird thing, and it's very, very full on. And then when it transmits to the horrific stuff, it's again the change in tone is unbelievable. I liked it myself. I really, really enjoyed it. I thought the musical numbers were all great. Lea Salonga is in it. I love her. Voice of Mulan, the singing voice of Mulan and of Jasmine from the Disney films. She's also a massive star on the West End and in Broadway. She's been in every musical you can possibly think of. She did the 10th anniversary of Les Miserables as Eponine, I do believe. And she's been in everything. She's been in absolutely everything. Her song is great, by the way, in Centaur World. Nothing Good, absolutely wonderful. Another tonal shift kind of comes out of nowhere. You've suddenly got this very epic Broadway style song in the middle of nowhere. Contrasted to that, you have Comfortable Doug, a song which has basically become viral on the internet and will probably determine whether you go and watch the show or whether you don't go and watch the show. For me, I saw the Comfortable Dog song. Someone put it up on I think it was Chris McFeely, actually, of Transformers: The Basics fame, put it up on Twitter, and I watched the Comfortable Dog song, and I was like, I've got to watch that. I've got to see that. That looks up my alley. And it's a beautiful piece of work. But it is, what I liked about it, as someone who has been a fan of cartoons since he was a kid, since the 1980s, you can see the DNA, you can see the evolution of children's media manifested in this thing. So I can see the DNA of Adventure Time, I can see the DNA of internet cartoons, I can see the DNA of Steven Universe and of Avatar, and even like way back into those old franchises of the 1980s. It's fascinating to me. But as I've said before, and as I will continue to say, it is so much more sophisticated than anything that was aimed at us when we were kids. Anything. It's not even in the same ballpark. And yet you will get, I guarantee they're already saying it, you will get people of my generation turning up their noses at it and sniffing at it and saying, oh, it's not like cartoons were when I was a kid. No, I'm really sorry. It's not. You're right. It's a million times better on an objective level. In terms of its technicalities, it's a million times better. The animation, the way it uses animation as storytelling, the imperative behind it to tell an actual story, to engage children imaginatively rather than to just sell them plastic. It's the voice acting is a million times better, the writing is a million times better, the direction is a million times better. It's a beautiful piece of work, and I'm really, really impressed with it. But now I've gone so far off topic of what I wanted to talk about. I was going to talk about perfection in writing, or rather that prose which is so good, it's as near as damn it. On a colloquial level, you may as well describe it as perfect. So there's a piece, there are certain writers, most of you will know this, most of you will have read this before. No live organism can continue for long to exist sanely under conditions of absolute reality. Even larks and katydids are supposed by some to dream. Hill House, not sane, stood by itself against its hills, holding darkness within. It had stood so for 80 years, and might stand for 80 more. Within, walls continued upright, bricks met neatly, floors were firm, and doors were sensibly shut. Silence lay steadily against the wood and stone of Hill House, and whatever walked there, walked alone. Now, that's the opening paragraph of The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, one of the most iconic, influential, significant haunted house stories ever written. Ever written. And there's a reason most readers of horror can quote it by heart. It is sublime. It's sublime. As prose goes on a sentence and structure level, it's sublime, but it goes beyond that. There is, as you probably heard, and as you know if you've read it, there is this underlying atmosphere that Jackson cultivates through the nature of her prose. The prose echoes the structure that she's trying to describe. The prose is as quiet and as precise as the structure of Hill House itself, and has all of the ambience and the echoes and the resonance of Hill House itself. And that, for me, is something that I just can't get over in written prose. When prose does that, when there is sincerity and when there is atmosphere and when there is feeling underneath it, but when it's that technically pristine as well. I mean, there's a reason. There's a reason why that book is reprinted and reprinted and readapted endlessly. And it's because the prose is almost second to none. There are a couple of other writers I can think of. Ursula K. Le Guin, her science fiction work, things like The Lathe of Heaven, for example. Some of the descriptions in that book, some of the way she communicates ideas. With Ursula K. Le Guin, her particular capacity, her genius, is in communicating ideas, and doing so in such a manner whereby, unlike, say, terrible writers like Ayn Rand, who can't even begin to conceal their agenda beneath their prose, Ursula K. Le Guin does it in such a way that you don't feel as though you're being lectured to. You don't feel as though you're in a seminar. You come to the ideas yourself. They germinate like fungi or like seeds in your brain as a result of the prose that you read. Another example, Mervyn Peake. Mervyn Peake, the writer of Gormenghast. There are descriptions in Gormenghast that are so good, that are so far removed from anything that anyone else would ever write, that they leave me breathless. I've reread Gormenghast recently as a result of the podcast I did with David Fagiani, the E-Goats podcast, and it leaves me breathless. It really does. Peake has an entirely other level of genius from Shirley Jackson and Ursula K. Le Guin. What he does is he runs with the ideas in his head to the point whereby the prose almost becomes stream of consciousness. It's almost beyond analysis what he does, and it's incredible. It's incredible. He'll be describing something of utter incidence, which in a creative writing class would get him kicked out or would get him criticism. He is describing the play of dust in sunlight, and it goes nowhere. There are entire story threads in Gormenghast that go nowhere and mean nothing to the wider story. But they are joyous. They are joyous to follow, and they make the story more. They swell it. They make it into something more fulsome and beautiful. I mean, I can't get over that. As writers, I can't. As a writer myself, I can't get over that. Clive Barker. I know I go on about Clive Barker all the bloody time on this channel. I'm sorry, I can't help it. He is just that guy to me. He's that writer. Clive Barker is another level. He has that element of Peake in him. He read Peake when he was a kid. That's perfectly obvious. He has that quality of following his trains of thought wherever they will go, his inspirations wherever they go, to the point whereby he follows an image or a concept and lets it effloresce into this incredible state of elaboration, but does so in such a manner that it's not rambling, it's not confusing, it's beautiful, it's absolutely stunning. Kit said this in our discussion about Weevil, but on a pure sentence level, when you read Barker, it's like, how does the man do this? How does the man write this well, and also at the same time communicate the incredible, elaborate, ambiguous ideas that he does? It is insanely good. It's insanely good. I read people like Mervyn Peake and like Clive Barker, and I find it difficult to... It's simultaneously inspiring and intimidating. it makes you look at your own work and say, well, I'm like a child, I'm like I may as well be doing things in crayon compared to these people. But at the same time, it makes you think, well, this is possible. That's what I got from Barker and from Peake and from Jackson and from Ursula K. Le Guin and a myriad others. This is possible. It's possible to explore ideas and concepts and whatnot in this manner, even within your own imperfections, even acknowledging that nothing you do will ever be perfect. It allows you to go forward, and I really appreciate that. You need that lesson, I think, as a writer, because I think a lot of writers go through that thing where they have like a hairy habdab when they're immature writers, where it's like it doesn't come out properly and they just abandon it. I did that when I was younger. It's sort of like, no, it's not working. I can't do it. I'm terrible. I'm blah. It becomes egocentric. It becomes narcissistic. But you get over it. You get over it and realize, yeah, that's what you have to go through to get this good. That's what you have to go through in order to hone what you're doing. And it's incredible. It is an incredible process. You do it through other writers as much as through your own work. Another one, Billy Martin writing as Poppy Z. Bright. I mean, with Billy Martin, it's the visceral nature of the prose. Billy has a capacity for making the reader feel things like sensually and viscerally that is, it's beyond anything else. It's beyond anything else. It's sublime. It's so visceral that when Billy describes food, for example, or sex or violence, you feel it. You smell the food. You are there in the midst of the sex. You are experiencing the pain in the violence, or the rage in the violence, or even, I mean, the more dangerous stories that Billy has written, the pleasure in the violence. It's something that I find difficult to quantify, but it is sublime. It is absolutely, utterly beautiful. I can't get over it. Another writer who a guest on this channel many, many times, Laura Marrow. Laura has this peculiar capacity for evocation in her prose. That's what I get from Laura. There is this lyrical evocation where she is describing the experiential, and it's so sincere that even little things and domestic moments resonate, and they make you feel. They make you identify with the characters. It's beautiful, and married to that, you have this love of folklore and the mythic and the strange and the horrific, but in such a manner that she's not interested, like Barker, like Billy Martin, like Shirley Jackson, is not just interested in scaring you, in grossing you out. That, for me, that's kind of a one-trick pony. I know, don't get me wrong, I get there are loads of writers out there that do that. There are loads of readers that love that, and all power to you. If that's what you like, that's what you like. That isn't really for me. I want something resonant and ambiguous and profound, and that's what Laura gives me. A lot of writers currently writing do that for me. People like, for example, Georgina Bruce and Priya Sharma do that for me. A lot of women writers, actually, who are operating in genres right now do that for me quite profoundly. And it's kind of beautiful. It is kind of it's a wonderful state to be in when you learn to put down notions of perfection, or when you see the paradox of the concept in all arenas. I think you start to appreciate things for what they are, And it's a shame because there is this sort of critical culture at large at the moment that is very prescriptive and it has very particular ideas of what constitutes what is good, and sadly they tend to be rather narrow. It tends to be rather prescribed, and I find that very sad. Given that there is such a wealth of good work out there at the moment. And it tends to be, as I mentioned before, with reference to sentiment and nostalgia, rather than with reference to anything real, anything technical. Sentiment and nostalgia are fine for what they are, but in order to appreciate them healthily and to stop them distorting your perspectives, you have to realize that they're delusions. They're delusions. What they paint in your mind is not the reality. The reality is actually much cruder, much meaner, much less worthy than you think it is. And And when you allow those delusions to close you off to the quality of what's new, then you start getting, well, you get Brexit from that. That's the truth of it. You get things like Brexit. You get cultural movements and political movements that are based entirely on the delusion of nostalgia and nothing else. It's a movement of hysteria and delusion that has no legitimacy, no weight behind it, and we're starting to see that now, obviously, with the very real effects of that and consequences of that movement. It starts small. It starts with regards to the things you like, the things you do as a hobby, the things you consume, and then it starts to affect everything. It starts to sort of insinuate itself. It's slightly cancerous. But yeah, there's so much out there, and I would heartily recommend you to sort of to burst out of whatever bubble you're in. Take a look on your Kindle, take a look on the bookshelves of bookstores, and even on Amazon. Look for new writers. I really would encourage that. Because there is such beautiful stuff being done. Take a look on Netflix for the new cartoon series and try to appreciate what they're doing in and of themselves rather than in reference to what tradition and your own personal history has conditioned you to believe good work is. Yeah? It's you will find beautiful things. You will have like a renaissance, I guarantee you. I certainly did.